Hey, welcome guys. Today we're going to take a look at AK Interactive's, we'll say new, quick gen paints. I say new with a hesitation because I believe they've been out since about June of 2025, but they are new to me. And so we're going to do a little unboxing review. We're going to test them and see kind of how they compare to, I guess, like a regular scale modeling, figure painting style, kind of see how it stacks up. The whole idea here with these paints is they are contrast paints that are supposed to go on in one single layer, and you get, you know, very, very nice results. That's the idea of them. They're made for board games. So I'm not overly familiar with these games, although I've seen them on the shelves. They come with like 50 figures, a bunch of like elves or something, and you got to paint up your army before you get to play the game. So that would take a ton of time to paint smaller than 1/35th scale figures and 50 of them. So AK Interactive, and there's already a bunch of other contrast paints on the market for miniatures. What they've done is they've given us these contrast paints that you do one layer and you're done, so that you can move on. Instead of spending 20 hours on a figure, maybe you spend one. As you can see here, recommended over a white base coat, which we'll get to, and kind of tells you, it settles in the shadows. It's water-based, which is nice. Doesn't smell. It's not toxic. But you cannot use water to thin it, and we'll get to this in a little bit. You need this thinning medium, I think. I got the 3 different color sets, as you can see here. They are mainly, again, for board games, so they're going to be like orc colors and mech colors and all this stuff. But they do have these military sets. So we got German, DAC, and US. There's also, I remember seeing a Russian and British and some other stuff. I did 3 different figures in 3 different ways. First one with the Tamiya Gray primer. Second one that you just saw with a white and black, like shadow primer. And then this last figure in a white primer, the way that the box has recommended us to use these paints. And so we'll start with the field gray here. And what we're going to do is we're going to use these paints the way that AK is telling us to use them. Again, white primer and just out of the jar. It doesn't say that you need to thin it. It says it can be used out of the jar with 1 coat of paint. Now, right away, using these paints, they are impressive. They are, for lack of better terms, they are cool. I've never used anything like this before. The way I paint my figures is using like a glazing method. So getting the paint super, super thin, like 90% thinner, and just building up a bunch of layers over time, which is going to leave a similar effect to this. And then going back using a dry brush and wash technique to further accentuate highlights. That's what this paint is basically going to do in 1 or 2 coats. As you can see there, and I'll show the figure again in a second, the field gray is really, really dark. I'm about to give up on this figure. Using it straight out of the jar, you definitely cannot use more than 1 layer of paint. I did not like the way that this paint dried over the white primer, which is funny because that's what it tells you to use. But anyways, didn't like the way it dried, went to do a second layer, and it got way too dark, way too quick. So that is the first thing. That is my first takeaway, is I'm never going to use these out of the jar without primer. And I'm probably not going to do them over a white base coat. But we'll talk about what base coat works well in a second here. I'm just fooling around a little bit with the thinner medium now and the German gray on his pants, and definitely getting better results kind of building the color up rather than just going for 1 heavy layer. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use about 3 parts primer to 1 part paint, and we're going to try more of like a glazing type method with this US figure here. And I will say, we will get far better results than we got with the field gray. I don't know if it's just the field gray color, or if it was the fact that I just used it, kind of hot and heavy out of the jar. But I think this method is just much, much better. So I wouldn't go back from here. If anything, what I will do in the future is I will use even more thinner and build up even more layers, which is funny because it's not necessarily time saving, but it is because we don't have to do the wash and the highlights and everything after. But you will spend, hours painting a figure, not just, 20 minutes. Maybe for those miniatures, maybe you could do one in 20 minutes, but to get good results on a bigger scale figure, I think we still have to slow it down here. And while I build up these layers on this US figure, I'll just mention price really quick. And I kind of look at it in two ways. First way is they're expensive. One of these sets was about $17. And that comes with 3 paints. And like I jokingly said, we get a bonus piece of chipping foam in the box, which is actually nice. I did shuffle away all 3 of those, and I will use those pieces of foam, but it's foam. The paint is expensive for a paint. An AK or an Ammo by Mig or Vallejo paint of that same size generally goes for like $3 for an acrylic. These are around $5 to $6. And then the thinning medium. You need the thinning medium, in my opinion, and that's about $17 as well. So you're spending over $30 on 3 paints and some thinner. Take it or leave it, it's a cool piece of futuristic tech, I guess, for our hobby, but it is not the cheapest. It's only $30. What's $30 anymore? But at the same time, you're only going to get 3 paints and some thinner for that. Now, that being said, the whole idea here is that if you're a beginner or, I bought a Higgins boat from a Tallery that comes with like 20 figures, and I don't want to spend months painting all those figures. That's why I was really interested in these paints. I can probably bust those figures out. It might still take like a week to get all those done with these paints, but I can bust out a lot of those figures in, we'll say, like a week or 2 rather than a couple months doing my old method. You're not going to have to do the washes, so you save money on the wash, and you're not going to have to get dry brushing tools and all that stuff for painting up a figure, at least in the way that I do it. Build up acrylic layer, come back with a dark wash, clean that up, and then do dry brushing highlights. So you are kind of saving money in that respect. If you're a beginner and you don't have all the tools, you'd have to acquire all those tools, where with these paints, you don't need any of those tools. You can just paint the figure with these paints, maybe clear coat it at the end, and call it a day. So that's the only caveat with price, is we'll say they can be expensive. I guess it depends on who's buying them, what you're buying them for, and everything like that. So the thinner. I think you 1000% need the thinner, as I said earlier. I will probably be using more than what I'm using now, which is about 2 to 3 drops of thinner per 1 drop of paint. I'll probably go up to like 5 or 6 drops of thinner and start using this even more as a glaze. You can see here on this US figure, this is a much better result than what we were getting from that field gray. I don't know if I love the field gray color or if it was just on the white primer, but I wouldn't use it on a white primer. I'm getting way better results on the Tamiya gray primer, which I know there's not a huge difference, but I don't know if it's just a better primer, a better product. Anyways, the paint needs to feel wet. It is an acrylic paint at the end of the day. And if you ever hand brushed with Tamiya paints before, this feels similar in a way, where all acrylic paints get like a stickiness to them if your brush isn't wet enough, and they'll pick up layers underneath and pick up like old paint that hasn't quite dried yet. But a Tamiya paint feels really good when it's wet, and then the second it's not, the second you go over something and it sticks, it feels terrible. These paints, without the thinner kind of remind me of that. They need to be wet, and because of that, the reason that I think people say you can't hand brush with Tamiya paint is because you have to use a lot of it, right? Where the bonus of other acrylics, water-based, you can water them down and use a lot, but not actually be using a lot. These paints, I think, function in the same exact way. If you use a lot, you're going to get a lot of flooding and things like that. If you thin them a lot, you can keep them really, really wet, but slowly build up those layers. So I'll show you at the end here. We are wrapping up a couple of the different comparisons to other figures, and I would love to hear in the comments what you guys think. I don't think personally that these replace doing figures in the kind of traditional way that I guess they should be done to really look realistic. But I do think they have a place on our bench. They will definitely be getting used for my Higgins boat. I don't know that I'm going to paint every single figure with these paints, although I will definitely keep trying them and messing around with them in different ways to get different results. But the technology is really, really exciting. I know the technology's been there in figure painting and miniatures for I think a long time now. I kept hearing that AK was late to the game with these, but the technology is really, really cool. It's like the paint markers from AK. Maybe they're not perfect yet. We need different tips for them, better range of colors or colors that actually match their real colors. Not to be too critical on them, but we're a really good step in the right direction, right? That's a step that I think we need in this hobby. This is another one of those steps that we need in this hobby. Is it going to be quite as good as if you did it the old-fashioned way and took 40 hours? No, probably not. But it gives you really, really good advanced results. Those folds in the back of that US Figures pants, they look amazing. Really good results from just like a couple layers, not any extra tools, no extra fuss. I would definitely recommend them to a beginner. It gives you a really good idea of like how these paints should flow when you're painting a figure. And yeah, I overall really, really like them. I'd like, again, to hear from other people what you think, doing a little comparison here with figures and what you think, how they look. That leather looks awesome. The black also looks really, really awesome. So thank you guys for watching up to this point. If you haven't already, I'd please ask you to like and subscribe to the channel. We'll be doing obviously many more model builds. I do like to do these kind of reviews and things, and we'll definitely do some figures with these paints and my old-fashioned paints. And I thank you guys for watching. We'll see you on the next video.